Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Universe of Tomorrow review. In this section, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards in the pack. First up is a new HB asset. This is called Cybernetics Court. It's unique, 0 to res, 5 to trash. It's also 5 influence. It's an asset, a facility, and it's ritzy. Your maximum hand size is increased by 4. In this pack, we're going to get this cycle of 5 influence assets that all have some pretty high-end, high-impact ability. This is the one that we're going to get for HB. Obviously, having a bigger hand size is going to be a good thing, but I think realistically you're going to want some sort of synergy with having a big hand to justify including a card like this in your deck. Other than just reducing the percentage chance that the runner is going to score agendas out of your hand, this could also interact well with cards that stay in your hand or somehow benefit from being in your hand. Immediately, the thing that comes to mind is the Grail Ice. It's nice to be able to hold several of these in your hand, so when the runner encounters your Grail Ice, you have 2 cards to reveal, and those can kind of clog up your hand over time. This would give you a way to mitigate that a bit. Along those lines, maybe using this with the Foundry and the Grail Ice could make sense, because the Foundry always is going to find you more ice when you res them, and that could potentially clog up your hand a little bit. But with this, you'd have a big hand size, and that wouldn't be as big of an issue. This is also pretty hilarious with an effect like Reuse, which gets a lot better when you have more selection or just more capacity to discard cards for credits. It's worth noting that you can already do that even better with Cerebral Imaging, so I don't know if people have really been doing that in that deck, and it seems a lot more powerful to do it in Cerebral Imaging versus just using this Cybernetics Court to make that card a little better. I don't think this card's great just because we can already do stuff with Cerebral Imaging to get a much larger hand size, but this is less volatile, and this is certainly the best asset or upgrade that we've seen so far that increases your hand size. So while I think this thing isn't insanely good or maybe not even playable, this is certainly a good direction for increasing the Corp's hand size. And this is just a much better design than things like Research Station. Next up, we have another asset for HB. This is Team Sponsorship. It's 1 to res, 4 to trash. It's 1 influence. Whenever you score an agenda, you may install a card from Archives or HQ, ignoring the install cost. This is sort of a more difficult to use but persistent and recurring in turns, and this card I think is pretty strong. It works really well with economy assets, especially things like Adonis that die and you're going to be able to reinstall. It also ignores the install cost, so if your ice gets trashed or something like that, you're going to be able to install an ice, potentially saving a few credits on the installation cost. And the fact that it's cheap to res and expensive to trash is going to make sure that it survives long enough that you can actually get it in play when you go to score. This is clearly stronger in a deck that plays a lot of agendas or plays more of like a 2-point oriented scoring pattern. So I think it's probably going to be best when you play lots of 3-for-2s in your deck, or maybe even play like domestic sleepers or something where you have more agendas in your deck. I could see Near Earth Hub liking this because it not only would draw you a card when you install it, but it's also going to be pretty easy to trigger since you're playing NBN and you got the whole AstroScript thing. This could also maybe be good in a deck that plays a really unusually large number of agendas, so like Argus or PE or something like that. I really like this design. 1 influence is going to make it easy to play in virtually any deck, and I think as long as you have something to do with this, it's going to always have a good impact, even if you only trigger it once or twice. Interns already sees a fair amount of play, and this having a very similar effect is a proven effect that we know is decent. I definitely think this will see some play. Next up is the winner of the Chronos Protocol Tour. It's appropriately called Chronos Protocol. Selective Mind Mapping. This is a new ID for Techy. It's a division type. It's 45-15 like normal. For the first net damage the runner suffers each turn, you may look at the runner's grip and select the card that is trashed. So this fits right into the 1,000 cuts style of Techy that we've already seen out of PE, where you're trying to poke them for a little bit of damage over time. And being able to pick the card is certainly going to boost the power, especially of 1 or 2 net damage effects that you're doing pretty occasionally. This really changes a card like Neural EMP, which generally you're just going to use as kind of a flatline effect. You're going to hold it in your hand until you can just kill them with it. But this might give you an incentive to play the Neural EMP just during a turn that they've made a run, because you're going to basically get to duress them, and that could be pretty strong. It also makes little damage that you're doing to them on their turn, like House of Knives or Yagura or something like that, a lot scarier, because it's going to be a lot harder to just run through it when they know you're going to get to take their best card. I'm not totally sure that I like going flatline oriented with this, because if you're going to do a flatline net damage deck, I really think you need to be playing PE. PE adds so much damage throughout the course of a game, at least like 4 or 5, and losing that for this admittedly very powerful effect, I'm not sure is going to benefit you flatlining them as much. So I could see this being more of like a rush style Techy deck that's trying to score out and is more of like a control-oriented, maybe glacier-y style. I don't know, I'm curious to see what people come up with this. It seems really powerful. I'm just not totally sure how to best utilize the different net damage effects to make this ID work as well as it could. Next up, we have a new agenda for Techy. This is a 3-for-1 called Ancestral Imager. It's a security type. Whenever the runner jacks out, do 1 net damage. In the past, I've been very critical of these jack out oriented effects, and I don't think this is any exception to that. I feel like maybe sometime down the road, we're going to see some more reasons why Techy has all this stuff oriented around jacking out. But for now, I don't really see a lot of incentive to play this thing. Really, the only thing that the runner can do with jacking out is the whole snitch au revoir thing. And that's pretty good, but I don't really see it as being very popular. So it's not like you're going to play this kind of agenda in your deck as a response to that thing. I feel like this is the type of card where a good runner is going to be able to play around having to jack out. They're not going to just run into like a chum and then you're going to poke them with this after they jack out. I don't really feel like that's the type of thing that happens a lot. And it's certainly not worth playing an agenda in your deck in the cases where that does come up. So I don't know, this is probably going to sit in the box, but maybe in the future we'll see some reasons for this jack out stuff. Next up we have Techy's entry in this asset cycle. This is Genetics Pavilion. It's 1 to res, 5 to trash, it's unique, it's a facility, and it's ritzy, 5 influence as they all are. The runner cannot draw more than 2 cards during his or her turn. This seems to be an emerging ability that Techy's been getting. We saw this type of effect first precedented with the Ice Lockdown, which it just has a subroutine that stops them from being able to draw cards at all. The big thing about that card, and this card to a lesser extent, is that they really help against I've Had Worse, which is a really powerful effect, especially against like PE and decks that are trying to do incremental net damage. It's a lot easier to finish the runner off with a card like Neural EMP or Ronin if you can prevent the runner from drawing cards to recover from like a snare or a fetal AI access. So that's definitely a big reason why PE and the damage-oriented decks have been looking at things like Lockdown. Now the big weakness of Lockdown is that if the runner plans well and is decent against PE, they can just draw the cards before they make the run, and they can get into a play pattern where it's like draw, draw, run third click, oh, I got snared, I'll ditch the tag. This is going to have a lot more utility in those kinds of situations because it's going to be good against effects that are already really popular in a lot of runner decks. Basically any card that's going to draw more than 2 cards. So Diesel, Quality Time, I've Had Worse, maybe the Fisk Seminar that we just looked at. One of the things I'm liking about this versus those effects is that if they get hit with something where they lose their whole hand, like Psychic Field or Kamainu, it's going to be a lot harder for them to just draw into like a Diesel Quality Time or something like that to just instantly refill their hand up to the full size. This card's certainly going to slow them down in that respect. Also, when they get hit with one of those effects, they're not going to just be able to click for 4 cards. That's something that PE has always kind of been soft to. If the runner just plays very slow and smart, it can be very difficult for PE to really push any kind of advantage. So I'm really into this card as kind of a control piece in that PE setup. I think it's definitely going to be worth playing 1 or 2 of these in a PE deck just to slow the runner's ability to draw down. And at a 5 to trash asset, it's going to be a huge pain for the runner to actually find the time and the credits to deal with this thing. That said, that's probably about the only thing you're going to do with this card. So this is definitely a very deck-dependent card. It's not going to really be useful outside of that context. But this is an interesting new tool for the Flatline Gen Techies, and I anticipate playing this thing since PE is one of my favorite decks. Next up is NBN's entry in this cycle. This is called Franchise City. It's 3 to res, 2 to trash, 5 influence. This one is not unique. It's a facility. When the runner accesses an agenda, add Franchise City to your score area as an agenda worth 1 agenda point. Like with an offer you can't refuse, this is another way for the corporation to make some points without actually scoring agendas. Now that's something that hasn't worked out that well on the runner side of the game with notoriety, but I do think that it's playably good on the Corp side of the game. This card certainly has some huge weaknesses though. First of all, it's low trash cost, so they're just going to get it in your central servers and trash it. It's going to be easy for them to run and trash it. And you also are going to have this resed when they access the agenda. So there's definitely going to be times where you're not going to want to spend these 3 credits to res this thing when they're accessing off of R&D or HQ and they could potentially access an agenda. I would definitely be more excited about this card if there wasn't basically a better version of this later in the pack. So I want to kind of talk more about this effect when we get to that card. The next card is an upgrade for NBN. This is called Product Placement. It's 0 to res, 2 to trash, it's 1 influence. It's an advertisement. If the runner accesses product placement from R&D, he or she must reveal it. When the runner accesses product placement, the Corp gains 2 credits, and you ignore that effect if it's in archives. This is maybe not the most exciting card of all time, but it is one that I have a lot of ideas of how to use it. I think this is pretty cool. Being an upgrade is going to mean that you can stick it in a server with something that you intend on them accessing, whether it be some kind of thing they're going to trash. You put this in your San server, something like that. It's also got a low influence cost, so it's going to be pretty easy to cram this into decks that are soft on R&D or soft on HQ, or just kind of need something to give them a little bit more credits. I like that you can just put this in a central that you anticipate them accessing. You can just put this in a server with cards that you think they're going to access, and it's always going to give you those credits off of R&D. Plus, if they want to stop you from gaining the 2, they're going to have to trash this stupid thing, and it does have a 2 trash cost. I kind of like this card. It's pretty incremental. It's not exactly the sexiest card that we've seen, but I do think it's going to see some play. And I think that it's definitely a nice little supplemental economy card that works in an interesting way. Next up is Wayland's entry in this cycle of assets. This one's called World's Plaza. It's unique, 2 to res, 5 to trash, 5 influence. It's a facility as well. World's Plaza can host up to 3 assets. Then it has click, install an asset from HQ on World's Plaza, and res it, lowering its res cost by 2 if able. In my eyes, this is pretty clearly the winner of this cycle. This is pretty awesome. This is the first way we've ever seen to be able to have more than one asset in a server, and you're going to be able to save credits on resing those assets as well. So worst case scenario, you're just going to res some like pad campaigns or some kind of money assets, and you're going to get a little bit more money out of them. But you could also stack powerful effects that do nasty things to the runner in the server. Like dedicated response team seems like a pretty cool card to put into this server. You could just kind of defend one server behind your archer or your just really nasty ice, and you won't have to build a bunch of remotes that are pretty easy for the runner to go trash. Another idea I have with this is that this could be more of a permanent home for something like the off-the-grid combo, I guess you could call it, where you put Chrysium Grid in HQ and then you put off-the-grid in a remote server. Even if you're not doing that, just the ability to consolidate your powerful assets all into one big server that's going to be expensive to trash all of them, and you're only going to have to defend them with one set of ice, that seems huge to me. And there's a lot of assets that don't really see play because it's just so easy for you to put them out there and they just get trashed. Or it costs too much, both in terms of the ice you're investing and the res cost of those ice, to be able to defend all of these remotes. So consolidating them all in behind one piece of ice seems like a huge effect to me. I really like to see a card like this. This is going to help a Wayland Control Glacier style of deck immensely, and I definitely anticipate this seeing play. Next up, we have another asset for Wayland. This one's called Public Support. It's 2 to res, 4 to trash, it's 3 influence. Place 3 power counters on Public Support when it's resed. When there are no power counters left on it, add it to your score area as an agenda worth 1 point. When your turn begins, remove a power counter from it. This card is freaking awesome. I really think this is going to see play right out of the pack. It not only works well with the World's Plaza that we are just looking at, but it's also just generally a pretty decent thing that you could include in a wide variety of decks. I definitely anticipate people trying to do Near Earth Hub with this, because it's going to be able to score that odd point after you scored 3 2-point agendas. And it's also going to be pretty good just in general with the Near Earth Hub ability, since when you install it, you're going to get to draw a card. And at 4 trash cost, especially behind some ice, this is going to be really expensive for the runner to deal with. The other thing I like about this is that you don't have to jump through any hoops. You really just have to have it survive the 3 turns, and you get the first turn not really free, but sort of easier, because you're going to be able to leave this face down until the start of your first turn with it in play, and you can res it there. My only wish for this card was that it was more influence. It seems to me like I'm most tempted to play it in NBN or maybe in HB, because those decks have lots of 3-for-2s. This is a great card. I definitely think this is the best card in the pack, and I anticipate this seeing quite a bit of play. Next up, we have a new piece of ice for Wayland. This is called Tour Guide. It's 2 to res, 0 strength, and it is 2 influence. It's a century. Tour Guide gains subroutine and the run. for each rezzed asset you have. My initial reaction to this is, it's not that bad, but it's not really great either. 0 strength means it's going to die to Parasite like every other 0 strength piece of ice in the game, but it's low res cost, and it's an end the run Sentry, which there aren't exactly a whole ton of in the game. It's also a low res cost piece of ice for Wayland, and Wayland's definitely weak on the lower end of ice. We've seen a trend lately where Wayland's getting a lot more of these cheaper, kind of end the run, kind of more generic ice, and this is definitely fitting in line with that. But I also like that this has the ability to get pumped sky high. If you're playing like the World's Plaza thing, or you just happen to have a deck with tons of assets. Mimic is certainly going to have some trouble with this piece of ice if you have like 4, 5, 6 rezzed assets, and it seems reasonably conceivable that you could do that, especially in light of the cards in this pack. Even if this doesn't see a lot of play, I think this is evidence that the designers realize that Wayland needs some better ice, and here's a cheap piece of ice that's going to be reasonably easy to play. It's not going to do anything if you don't have a rezzed asset, but you're probably going to be able to do that without a whole lot of headache, and I think this is probably going to be good enough, especially in a Wayland deck. Next up, we have an upgrade region for Wayland. This is called Expo Grid. It's 0 to res, 3 to trash, it's 3 influence. When your turn begins, gain a credit if there is a rezzed asset installed in this server. Here's another card that plays right into this block of Wayland cards we're seeing in this pack. This is going to really help that sort of strategy out as well. It's kind of just a free pad campaign sort of thing, where the only requirement is that you have an asset in that server when your turn begins. I feel like a lot of these cards, their playability is going to be largely contingent on whether or not we can build a Gagarin or just some kind of control-y glacier-y Wayland deck that's actually competitive and good enough. These cards are going to be a lot better if that type of deck emerges. I think it's always been kind of on the fringe. It's been pretty tier 2. And these are just a massive, massive shot in the arm for this type of deck. The last card in the pack is a 3-for-1 agenda that is neutral. It's called The Future Is Now. It's an initiative type. When you score The Future Is Now, search R&D for a card and add it to HQ. Shuffle R&D. There aren't a massive lot of 3-for-1s that are playable, and I think this one joins those ranks. This is a pretty sweet card. The main issue I'm seeing with this is just that 3-for-1s are pretty difficult to play in a lot of decks, and unless you have a role for a 3-for-1, this is definitely just going to sit in the box. That said, this effect seems good enough to me. I'm mostly excited about playing this in a deck like Argus or PE, the decks that like to play lots of 3-for-1s. Especially in PE, I could see this being cool because you could tutor up like economy tools or just like a nasty trap thing that you're going to motion, and you don't actually have to reveal the card, which is pretty sweet for a PE deck. This certainly raises the bar of quality for 3-for-1s. I don't know if this will see a ton of play, but I really like this as a design. I think that 3-for-1s and a lot of agendas just period have been far too weak in Netrunner, and this is a good effect that's always going to help you. It's generally useful, and if you're going to want 3-for-1s, this is going to be among the agendas that you're considering. That's going to do it for my Universe of Tomorrow review. I can't help but think that the quality of the designs in this pack are truly exceptional. I really like this pack, and even if the cards aren't like huge metagame defining things, they indicate that the design team is starting to get the power level of different effects right, and that they realize that there's certain problems with the card pool, especially Wayland Glacier, and that they're heavily addressing them. On top of that, a lot of the effects in this pack are things that we basically can't do with other cards. So we've got a lot of truly unique designs going on here. The cycle of the 5 influence assets, those are definitely pretty imbalanced in terms of their power level. I think that World's Plaza is just substantially better than the rest of them, but that doesn't necessarily mean the rest of them are bad. The bigger trend that I'm seeing in this pack is this last little trend of Wayland cards that we got, which clearly address one of the archetypes of Wayland that I think should have been better. This pack makes me really hopeful for the future of Netrunner, and I just really think that there's a lot of breadth building with this, a lot of strategies that aren't really all that good get some new tools that are going to make them more powerful, and that's true on both sides of the pack. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please click subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.